Arrogant businessman bullies. Humble traveler on plane discovers. He just interviewed his new boss. The lobby of the Marriott Marquis in downtown Chicago gleamed with corporate polish on a crisp October morning. Preston Walsh stood near the elevators adjusting his Hermès tie and checking his reflection in the polished marble walls. At 39 years old, Preston cut an impressive figure, 6 feet tall, impeccably groomed, wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. His Montblanc briefcase, his Patek Philippe watch, his Italian leather shoes, everything about Preston screamed success, ambition, and carefully cultivated image. He was there for a job interview, and he was supremely confident. The position was Chief Marketing Officer at Riverside Technologies, a mid-sized software company that had been growing explosively over the past 3 years. The role represented a significant step up from his current position as Senior VP of Marketing at a smaller firm. More importantly, the CMO position came with a substantial salary increase, equity package, and the prestige of a C-suite title. Preston had spent weeks preparing. His presentation was polished to perfection. His talking points memorized his research on Riverside exhaustive. He knew the company's revenue numbers, their market positioning, their recent product launches, their competitive landscape. He had stalked the LinkedIn profiles of every executive he might meet, learning their backgrounds, their career trajectories, their likely priorities. What Preston didn't know, what his research had somehow missed, was that Riverside Technologies had just undergone a major leadership change. The previous CEO, Richard Denton, had retired 2 weeks ago, and the board had appointed a new CEO who had been working quietly for the past 6 months as a consultant to the company. The new CEO was intensely private, had no social media presence, and had specifically requested that his appointment not be publicly announced until after he had time to meet key personnel and assess the organization. That new CEO's name was Adrian Cole, and at this very moment, he was sitting in the same hotel lobby 20 feet from Preston, looking nothing like a CEO. Adrian was 52 years old, dressed in a simple navy blue sweater, khaki pants, and comfortable walking shoes. His graying hair was slightly disheveled. He wore no watch, and his only accessory was a pair of drugstore reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents in a plain manila folder. Everything about Adrian suggested a middle-aged man of modest means, perhaps a teacher, an accountant, or a technical writer. The reality was considerably different. Adrian Cole had spent 30 years building and transforming companies. He had been CEO of 3 different tech firms, taking each from struggling to thriving through a combination of strategic vision, operational excellence, and genuine care for employees. His philosophy was simple: hire great people, treat them well, get out of their way, and let results speak louder than rhetoric. Adrian had been recruited by Riverside's board specifically because the company needed someone who could scale their success while maintaining culture and innovation. He had accepted on the condition that he could take time to truly understand the company before making major changes, hence the 6 months as a consultant before officially assuming the CEO role. Today was his first official day as CEO, and he had a packed schedule of meetings, including interviews for the open CMO position. He had arrived at the hotel early. The interviews were being conducted in a conference room on the 20th floor and was using the time to review candidate materials. Preston noticed the older man in casual clothes sitting nearby and immediately dismissed him as irrelevant. Probably someone attending a different conference or maybe a tourist. Certainly not someone worth Preston's attention or networking efforts. Preston's phone buzzed. A text from the Riverside HR coordinator. Mr. Walsh, your interview is scheduled for 10 a.m. in conference room 2015. Please arrive 10 minutes early to complete paperwork. Preston checked his watch, 9:42 a.m. Perfect timing. He would arrive precisely 10 minutes early, demonstrating punctuality without seeming overeager. He had calculated this carefully. At 9:48, Preston walked to the elevator bank. Adrian, having finished his document review, stood up at the same time and walked toward the same elevators. They arrived simultaneously. The elevator doors opened. Preston stepped in first, without holding the door or acknowledging Adrian's presence. Adrian caught the door before it closed and stepped in after him. "What floor?" Adrian asked politely, his hand hovering over the buttons. 20, Preston said curtly, not looking at Adrian, his attention on his phone. "Same here," Adrian said, pressing the button. The elevator began its ascent. Preston positioned himself at the front, checking his appearance in the reflective elevator doors one final time. Adrian stood quietly in the back corner holding his manila folder. At the 10th floor, the elevator stopped. A hotel maintenance worker entered, pushing a cart with cleaning supplies. The worker, an older Latino man with weathered hands, nodded apologetically. Sorry, just going to 15. Preston sighed audibly and stepped pointedly away from the cart, as if contamination was a genuine concern. He muttered under his breath, "This is why you take the express elevators." The maintenance worker pressed 15 and stepped back, clearly uncomfortable with Preston's reaction. Adrian spoke up. "No worries at all. We all have jobs to do." The maintenance worker smiled gratefully at Adrian. "Thank you, sir. Have a good day." "You too," Adrian replied warmly. Preston rolled his eyes, finding Adrian's friendliness with service staff to be performative and unnecessary. When the maintenance worker exited at 15, Preston said to Adrian, though not really to him, more thinking aloud in a way that assumed shared perspective, "People need to understand that business floors should be separate from service elevators. It's inefficient." "Is it?" Adrian asked mildly. "Seemed pretty efficient to me. We all got where we needed to go." Preston finally looked at Adrian, directly assessing him with barely concealed disdain. "Are you here for a conference or something?" "Meetings," Adrian said simply. "What do you do?" "I work in technology." "Ah." Preston said, his tone suggesting he lost what little interest he'd had. Probably some technical consultant or middle manager. "I'm here for a C-suite interview, CMO position at Riverside Technologies." "Congratulations," Adrian said. "That sounds like a significant opportunity." "It is," Preston agreed, his confidence evident. "They're lucky to have me on their shortlist. I built 3 marketing departments from scratch, drove 40% revenue growth at my current company, and I have an MBA from Wharton. I'm honestly overqualified, but Riverside has potential if they're willing to listen to someone who knows what they're doing." "That's quite a resume," Adrian observed. "You need credentials to play at this level," Preston said. "Too many companies promote people based on tenure or likability rather than actual qualifications. That's why so many firms are mediocre." The elevator reached 20. Preston stepped out first, immediately looking for signs directing him to conference room 2015. Adrian exited after him, walking in the same direction. The conference room area had a small waiting lounge with coffee service. 3 other candidates were already waiting, 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed professionally, all reviewing notes or checking phones. Preston helped himself to coffee, not bothering with pleasantries toward the other candidates. They were competition, after all. Why fraternize with people he might be beating out for the position? Adrian walked past the waiting area to a different door, marked Conference Room 2015, Private. He knocked once and entered. Preston, noticing this, wondered briefly who the old man was meeting with, then dismissed it as irrelevant. Probably some lower-level consultation. Nothing to do with the CMO interviews. At exactly 9:58, the HR coordinator, a pleasant woman in her 30s named Sharon, emerged from a different conference room. "Mr. Walsh, we're ready for you." Preston set down his coffee, grabbed his briefcase, and followed Sharon into Conference Room 2015. The room was large and professional, with a long-table video conferencing equipment and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Seated at the table were 4 people. Preston recognized 3 of them from his research: Jennifer Martinez, Chief Technology Officer; David Park, Chief Financial Officer; and Sharon Reeves, VP of Human Resources. Not the same Sharon who had escorted him in, that was Sharon Chen, the HR coordinator. The 4th person was Adrian Cole, the man from the elevator, still in his casual sweater and khakis. Preston's brain stuttered for a moment, not understanding. Why was that random guy sitting in on his interview? Was he some kind of technical consultant they'd brought in for a second opinion? Sharon Reeves spoke first. "Mr. Walsh, thank you for coming. Let me introduce our panel. I'm Sharon Reeves, VP of HR. This is Jennifer Martinez, our CTO, and David Park, our CFO." She paused, then gestured to Adrian. "And this is Adrian Cole, who just officially became our CEO 2 weeks ago." Preston's confident smile froze on his face. The random guy from the elevator, the man in the cheap sweater, the person Preston had dismissed entirely and made disparaging comments in front of, was the CEO of the company he was interviewing with. "Mr. Walsh," Jennifer prompted. "Are you all right?" Preston recovered his composure with effort. "Yes. Sorry. It's a pleasure to meet all of you." He extended his hand across the table, shaking with each panel member. When he reached Adrian, their hands met, and Adrian's grip was firm but not aggressive. "We've actually already met," Adrian said with a slight smile. "In the elevator." "Yes, I didn't realize." Preston fumbled. "No reason you should have," Adrian said easily. "I don't exactly look like a typical CEO. Please have a seat. Let's talk about why you're interested in Riverside." Preston sat down, his carefully prepared composure cracking. He had built his entire interview strategy around impressing executives with his polish and credentials. Now he was facing someone who clearly didn't value the same markers of success Preston had spent his career cultivating. Well, Preston began trying to recover his rehearsed opening. "I believe Riverside represents an exciting opportunity for someone with my background and expertise to drive transformational growth in your marketing operations." "What makes you think our marketing needs transformation?" Jennifer asked. "All marketing departments need transformation," Preston said, falling back on his talking points. "The digital landscape evolves constantly. Consumer behavior shifts, competitive dynamics change. Standing still is moving backward. But you don't actually know anything about our current marketing operations," David observed. "You said all marketing departments, not your marketing department specifically." Preston felt himself sweating slightly. "Of course, I'd need to assess your current state, but my experience suggests that most companies in your growth stage struggle with scalability, brand consistency, and data-driven decision-making. Do you think we're struggling with those things? Adrian asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than confrontational. I assume there are opportunities for improvement, Preston said carefully. Otherwise, you wouldn't be hiring a CMO. We're hiring a CMO because our previous one retired, Sharon Reeves clarified. She did excellent work for 8 years. We're looking for someone to continue building on that foundation, not to dismantle and rebuild. Preston nodded, trying to adjust his pitch. Of course. Building on strong foundations. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Mr. Walsh, Adrian leaned forward. In the elevator, you made some interesting comments. You said people need to understand that business floors should be separate from service elevators. Can you elaborate on that? Preston's mind raced. This was a trap. How did he explain that comment without sounding like the elitist it had revealed him to be? I think I was just commenting on efficiency, Preston said, making sure everyone can get where they need to go quickly. But everyone did get where they needed to go, Adrian pointed out. The maintenance worker got to 15, we got to 20. The only inefficiency was the 30 seconds we waited. Were those 30 seconds really that valuable to you? Well, time is money, Preston said, attempting a light laugh. Is it? Adrian asked. Or is time just time? And our obsession with never wasting a single second is actually what makes us inefficient because we're too rushed to think clearly or treat people decently. Preston had no good response to that. Jennifer picked up the questioning. Mr. Walsh, I looked at your LinkedIn profile. You have an impressive history of driving revenue growth. But I also noticed that several of your former colleagues have posted about toxic work culture at your previous companies. Do you have any response to that? LinkedIn is full of disgruntled employees who couldn't handle high-performance cultures, Preston said dismissively. When you set high standards, some people rise to meet them and others complain. So, you believe the complaints about toxic culture are just from underperformers? Sharon Reeves asked, making notes. Generally, yes, Preston said. In my experience, the people who complain about culture are the ones who aren't delivering results. What if delivering results and maintaining healthy culture aren't mutually exclusive? David asked. What if companies can do both? In theory, sure, Preston said. But in practice, there are trade-offs. If you want aggressive growth, you need aggressive tactics. Some people can't handle that intensity. Adrian had been quiet, just listening. Now he spoke again. Mr. Walsh, why do you want this job? Because it's a significant career advancement, Preston said honestly. CMO at a high-growth company, equity, upside chance to build something significant. What about the work itself interests you? Adrian pressed. What about marketing as a discipline excites you? Preston hesitated. The truth was that he saw marketing as a path to executive status, not as a calling. But he couldn't say that. I'm passionate about driving business outcomes through strategic communication and brand building. It was a corporate nothing answer, and everyone in the room knew it. Adrian sat back. Mr. Walsh, I'm going to be direct with you. In the 10 minutes we spent together in the elevator, you revealed more about your character than your resume ever could. You were dismissive of a maintenance worker doing his job. You made elitist comments about separating business floors from service areas. You treated me with indifference and mild contempt because you assumed I wasn't important. Preston felt his face burning. Mr. Cole, I apologize if... Let me finish, Adrian said, his voice still calm but firm. Then when you realized I was the CEO, your entire demeanor changed. Suddenly I mattered. Suddenly I was worth engaging with. That tells me your respect is conditional on someone's position and status. And that's not the kind of leader we want at Riverside. I made a mistake, Preston said. I was nervous about the interview, not thinking clearly. You weren't nervous in the elevator, Adrian interrupted. You were perfectly comfortable. Comfortable enough to make disparaging comments because you thought you were among people who didn't matter. That's when people reveal who they really are, when they think there are no consequences. Jennifer spoke up. Mr. Walsh, we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. We have several other candidates to interview, and we'll be in touch within the week. It was clearly a dismissal. Preston understood that his chances had evaporated the moment Adrian revealed his identity. I'd like another chance to make a better impression, Preston said desperately. My credentials are solid. My track record is proven. Your credentials are impressive, Adrian acknowledged, but credentials aren't enough. We're looking for someone who treats everyone with respect, regardless of their position. Someone who believes that culture and results aren't competing priorities. Someone who sees employees as human beings, not as resources to be optimized. I can be that person, Preston insisted. Can you? Adrian asked. Or will you just perform being that person until you're comfortable enough to reveal your actual beliefs again? Because I've seen this pattern before. People can moderate their behavior when they know they're being watched, but their true character emerges when they think no one important is looking. The interview concluded shortly after with professional handshakes and polite goodbyes that couldn't disguise the reality Preston had destroyed his chances before the interview even began. As he rode the elevator back down alone, this time Preston replayed every moment of the morning, cringing at his comments, his assumptions, his casual cruelty toward the maintenance worker, his dismissal of Adrian. He had lost a dream job because he couldn't see past appearances, because he had assumed that success looked a certain way and that people dressed casually couldn't possibly be important. It was an expensive lesson in humility. Adrian, meanwhile, continued interviews throughout the day. The next candidate was a woman named Maria Santos, who had arrived early and struck up a friendly conversation with the maintenance worker who had been on the elevator asking about his family and genuinely listening to his responses. Adrian had been watching from across the lobby. Maria's credentials were slightly less impressive than Preston's. She had an MBA from a state school, rather than Wharton, had worked for smaller companies, had less flashy revenue numbers on her resume. But when Adrian and the panel interviewed her, Maria spoke about marketing as a way to genuinely connect with customers, to build relationships, to create value. She talked about her team at her current company like they were people she cared about, not resources she managed. She acknowledged mistakes she'd made and lessons she'd learned. When Adrian asked her the same question he'd asked Preston, "Why do you want this job?" Maria answered honestly. "Because I love the work. I love figuring out how to tell stories that resonate, how to build brands that matter to people, how to create campaigns that drive business results while also making customers' lives better. The title and the money are nice, but they're not why I do this." At the end of her interview, Adrian walked her to the elevator. As they waited, the same maintenance worker passed by with his cart. "Have a good afternoon," Maria said to him warmly. "You too, miss. Good luck with your meeting." "Thank you." In the elevator, Adrian said, "You made a connection with him earlier." "With Carlos?" "Yes, he was telling me about his grandson who just started college. First in their family. It's wonderful." "You remembered his name?" "Of course. Why wouldn't I?" Adrian smiled. "Maria, I think you're going to fit in very well at Riverside." "Does that mean we have a couple more interviews to complete? But between you and me, unless something unexpected happens, I think we found our new CMO." Maria got the offer 3 days later. She accepted immediately, thrilled, not just by the compensation package, but by the culture she'd observed, the values the leadership team articulated, the sense that Riverside was a place where she could do meaningful work while being true to herself. Preston, meanwhile, received a polite rejection email thanking him for his time and wishing him well in his career. No explanation, no feedback, just a standard form letter. He was furious at first, then embarrassed, then slowly thoughtful. He kept replaying that elevator ride, those casual comments he'd made, the assumptions that had felt so natural in the moment. He had genuinely believed that separating business travelers from service workers was reasonable. He had genuinely not considered the maintenance worker as someone worth acknowledging. He had genuinely judged Adrian as unimportant based solely on clothing. When had he become that person? Preston thought back to his early career, to his 20s, when he'd been scrambling to make it, working long hours, grateful for every opportunity. He remembered being kind to receptionists and assistants because they were gatekeepers who could help or hinder him. He remembered treating everyone with courtesy because he needed all the allies he could get. Somewhere along the way, as he'd climbed the ladder, that courtesy had become conditional. He'd started categorizing people into those who could help him and those who couldn't. He'd started measuring interactions by their potential return on investment. He'd started believing his own press about being exceptional, special, deserving of deference. He had become an asshole. A successful asshole, sure, but an asshole nonetheless. And it had just cost him the job he wanted most. 2 weeks after the interview, Preston did something unusual for him. He reached out to Adrian Cole, directly sending a carefully worded email. "Mr. Cole, I've spent the past 2 weeks thinking about our interaction and the interview that followed. I want to apologize for my behavior in the elevator, not because I hope it will change your hiring decision, but because you were right about everything you said. I have become someone who judges people by their position and appearance, who treats respect as a commodity to be distributed strategically rather than a baseline courtesy owed to everyone. That's not the person I want to be, and it's not the person I used to be. I don't expect a response to this email. I just wanted you to know that the conversation we had, while painful, was also valuable. You held up a mirror, and I didn't like what I saw, but seeing it was necessary. Thank you for that uncomfortable gift. Sincerely, Preston Walsh." Adrian responded the next day. "Preston, I appreciate your email and your self-reflection. Recognizing our flaws is the first step toward addressing them. I'm not going to offer you the CMO position. We've hired someone who's an excellent fit for Riverside. But I do want to offer you something else, a challenge. Spend the next year practicing seeing everyone as equally human, equally worthy of dignity and respect. Treat the janitor at your office the same way you treat the CEO. Learn the names of service workers you interact with regularly. Strike up conversations with people you'd normally dismiss as unimportant. Not because it's strategic, not because they might be secretly important. but because it's the right way to treat human beings. If you can do that for a year genuinely and consistently, you'll become a better leader than any amount of technical skill or strategic brilliance could make you. Best of luck, Adrian Cole. Preston printed the email and taped it to his bathroom mirror where he would see it every morning. A daily reminder of who he didn't want to be and who he was working to become. He started small, learning the name of the security guard in his office building, asking the barista at his regular coffee shop about her day, and actually listening to the answer. Holding doors, making eye contact, saying thank you with genuine appreciation. It felt awkward at first, performative, like he was playing a role. But over time, something shifted. The people he interacted with became individuals rather than functions. Their stories became interesting rather than irrelevant. The world became richer when he stopped categorizing everyone into important and not important. 6 months later, Preston was interviewing for a different CMO position at a different company. In the building lobby, he encountered a delivery person struggling with several large boxes. "Need a hand?" Preston asked, setting down his briefcase. "Oh, that would be great, thanks." Together, they carried the boxes to the service elevator. As they rode up, they chatted about the unusual winter weather, the delivery person's route that day. Nothing profound, but genuinely friendly. "Thanks again for the help," the delivery person said as they parted ways. "Good luck with whatever you're here for." "Thank you. Have a great rest of your day." Preston arrived at his interview feeling grounded and calm. The company hired him 3 weeks later, impressed by his credentials, but more impressed by his genuine warmth during interactions with everyone from the receptionist to the senior executives. And somewhere in San Francisco, Adrian Cole received a brief email from Preston. "1 year later, and I'm finally starting to understand. Thank you for the push in the right direction." Adrian smiled and filed the email in a folder labeled Good Outcomes. He believed that people could change, that growth was possible. That sometimes the best thing a leader could do was challenge someone to be better. The arrogant businessman who bullied a humble traveler on a plane had learned that appearances deceive, that respect should be unconditional, and that true leadership begins with seeing the humanity in everyone. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but it was a lesson that stuck. And in the end, that's all any teacher can hope for.